John, good to see you. It's been a couple weeks, so it's good to sit down and chat with you.
Thanks, John. Bonsoir. I guess you're in Paris. It's like 11 o'clock at
Yeah,
night. I
yeah.
appreciate you doing this after operating in. You're a great American for doing that. Thank you.
Well, I'm happy to do it. I know you guys have been working hard this past week, and honestly, I think we probably would have maybe punted this a day or two. But when I landed, it definitely looked like it has been a little bit of an interesting week, to put it lightly. And so I would like to jump into that kind of big picture.
Sure.
What transpired this past week, where do we sit, and just your overall picture, and then we can kind of dive into what happened at the table.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So it's a little bit, the week took some unexpected turns. We thought it was going to be kind of a quiet week because of what had been previously exchanged and the fact it was truncated due to the holiday. So we only were scheduled to meet from all day Wednesday, Thursday into the noon on Friday. And so things we might as well just talk about everything maybe in sequential order. The first thing that happened was on Wednesday morning after you checked in with the mediator, let him know, hey, we're here. He said, well, I want to talk with you and both parties at the same time, then come talk to you individually. And said we said fine, and we went in there, and he said that he's elected to retire from the NMB at the end of July, and he's going to be unavailable in July. So this was something we were completely not expecting, and Alpha staff wasn't expecting, because I know that was the first question I asked of our Alpha staff when I walked out of the room. I was like, hey, did you know this was coming? And no, they didn't. So, this is an external variable in the negotiating process that, quite frankly, we can't control. We just have to deal with it. Um, at some point, I might as well cover this now. I have no idea what's going to happen next. I'm sure that they probably have, there's a new mediator being lined up, and I don't know who that is or what that person's schedule is, and we'll just have to deal with it. It certainly cast a different pall on the overall environment when we got into it for the rest of the week. Um, all that we really had in the listed agenda was retirement and work rules, and then whatever any other section or issues the parties wanted to bring up. So we thought this week would be a good opportunity to have Michael Winston, our outside counsel from Manhattan, who's helping us with scope, come to Charlotte, because it's been 6 weeks since the company's had our full language scope proposal, and we thought it would be good, to have some dialogue to try to advance that section, because that's a really difficult, complicated section. That's what we're anticipating on doing. And when we had this, news from the mediator that, we went back and talked about that for a while, and it says, well, we've got to press, and we're just going to keep doing the best that we can do. And so the first, what was on the docket and what they started out with, if my memory serves me right, is the company notice or retirement proposal this time. This is, like I wrote in the update, and I'm going to reference the update that came out earlier today occasionally. This was the second pass in retirement with the company dealing with our committee. And essentially what happened this time was there was no new money brought, but it was a different structure, right? So the company's retirement is, you can have proposals, you can have two options. Option one is you stay in the legacy defined benefit, and the FAE cap is 330. Now in the TA, that cap would have eventually staggered, I think, on January 1st of 27 to 338. But where it is right now, it's at 330. What they're proposing is that it just stays at 330. And if you wanted to transition, the first thing that they had offered in the first pass was the TA market-based plan, which is 11% of compensation credits up to the IRS compensation limit, which in 2025 is 350,000. And in both of those cases, there was no change to our current defined contribution plan, which is 9% that's capped. So that's what their first pass was. We had actually opened, with our three options, and in our world, we had looked at the market base. We understood what was being attempted there, but we thought it was deficient. We didn't think 11% was correct, and certainly since we're in 482C, that affects things like that. So the thing about whether if you're doing defined contribution or the market base, that's just a straight out function of how much work's being performed. So we took the initial position that we wanted to do a flat dollar rate that was tied to the top of scale wide body captain. And if you did the math, we had an inflation escalator on there. It came to around $50,000. That would have gone to every pilot, no matter where you were on the seniority list. And we thought if we could achieve something like that, then the market-based plan would be palatable. There's no question that the market plan meets with resistance from our pilots. I think that's left over from the previous TA and the ratification. And so we are trying to find a way to make it viable. And the thing of us that we liked about that, the 100% flat dollar one didn't have a work component to it. It turned out the company, they weren't interested in that. And so we took another attempt at that where we did what we call the hybrid plan, which what we proposed was like everyone gets $15,000 flat dollar and plus the 11% on top of it. That $15,000 flat dollar component would allow you to have monies in there that exceeds the compensation limit. That one didn't get traction either. And going back to the market plan, the reason I think I've said this to you before, and I know I've said it when I talk to pilots. If we were just starting out in retirement with our committee and we weren't sitting on a failed TA and we weren't involved with the NMB, we would have taken a much different tact on retirement. So, I helped establish the retirement that went into existence in 1999 in negotiations. And I asked our Paul Karg, who's the managing director of ENFA, hey, could you give me an inflation adjusted number for the 130,000, which is what we've had since 6/1 of 99, and run it to present day. And that number is just under 251,000. So to replicate 130 from June 1 of 99, it was like $250,923 based off, the Bureau of Labor Statistics and all that stuff. So if you wanted to apply the same methodology to the legacy plan, then you would need to have a cap of, slightly over $500,000. If you wanted to take, back then, 130 was the most you could receive in a payout. Now it's 280. The cap could be as far north as 560. Now, we entered the process where we did after the failed TA and with the NMB. ALPA's previous efforts never broached the cap that high, and there's no doubt that would be an extremely expensive proposition. So the thing about dealing with what we were given with the market plan is we're trying to find, there's good and bad. I think I've said this in an update. In the three options that we proposed, we could give you plus and minuses on all of them. And I say all the time, putting aside my personal opinion about what I think would be in there, what I would want. The thing about it, if you have a market plan, that allows you to, that's a defined benefit bucket of money that frees up money over on the defined contribution side if you were going to fill up and be a saver. Now, all of that is only attractive to people who have a world view that they think FedEx is a great place to be and is going to be in the future. And if you don't have that worldview, then you're probably more aligned with wanting to have a straight defined contribution plan, which is what you see at all the other carriers except at UPS. They still have a legacy and a defined contribution. Years ago, after the world economic downturn, Alaska offered a cafeteria plan, and they transitioned from their legacy to DC. So everywhere else pretty much has roughly 18%. Southwest has a little bit of a richer benefit. And some places do have a market-based plan for when you hear the term cash over cap. Those are the monies that either exceed the 401A 17, that's the compensation limit, or once you hit on the defined contribution side, the 415C limit and money above that. So at some places like Delta, they do have a marketplace plan, and that thing functions as a repository for the excess monies. It it is at a very conservative investment ratio because it's a preservation of capital. Some other places, American is still trying to get theirs approved by the IRS, I believe, and United is going through the same process. The alternative to that is the money just comes to you as cash. I'm getting a little long-winded there, but I think the company heard us when we were engaging with them at the table that there was tremendous difficulties with the market-based plan and how it's viewed within our membership. So I think they heard us, and then what came across on Wednesday, really long way to get around to what you asked, is they offered an 18% defined contribution thing, but with a bit of a catch, and the bit of a catch is that they put a limit of 1,000 times the top of wide body scale limiter on that. So we'll get to compensation here in a minute. Not to be a spoiler, but everybody knows what's out there. I think the number is 41609. So they would limit your cash over cap to 416,000. No one else has got that. Like I said in the update, United's management attempted to put something in there, in their what we call the TUMI TA, and that was just overwhelmingly rejected, and it failed at 94%. So we did have a conversation with the company about why do you got to be so different about this, and in the defined contribution plan, it's if you don't have the worldview that FedEx is going to be around long term, or that you might not be able as an individual stay employed here because you just don't like how it's tracking, and you want control of your money, then I certainly, and our committee certainly understands why a straight DC plan would be attractive to you. Just bear in mind, here's another little side detour, John, is that in the 60s and 70s, we had the defined benefit plan used to be called the A fund, and the defined contribution was called the B fund. And the reason it was called the B fund is because the pilots all had to retire at 60, and ALPA helped negotiate this because they thought it was unfair. The pilots were having to retire at a relatively early age, and so the B fund was helped to make up for that deficit, and you're going to be living longer in retirement in theory and just having to retire younger. Now, what's happened at all these other carriers that all used to have defined benefit plans and now have the 18% cash over cap is they all lost them in bankruptcy. And so what's a really challenging aspect to what's being presented here is that at the core of the company's our retirement proposal is the closure of the legacy plan to future new hires, whenever that would be. Right now, we're still 700, 8 overstaffed apparently, and I don't know when they would hire again. But getting back to that limit, no one else has got that. And this is just one of the things that's difficult when you engage with FedEx management. I told them a story, and I don't think these two attorneys on the other side had heard it. But I did this stuff a long time ago, and I was the vice chairman for like 7.5 years, from 2000 to 2007.5. Then I returned in late 2008 as the chairman. And way back in the early 2000s, they wanted us. We negotiated over having a FOQA program and ASAP, and we couldn't come to agreement because FedEx insisted that, unlike the rest of the industry, they insisted that the company would be the gatekeeper for the FOQA data, and also that there would not be any protection for a person who filed a sole source ASAP report. And we said, look, that's not how it goes everywhere else, and we're just not going to sign on to that. And there was a lot of other reasons why the company was asking for that. I don't need to belabor that. We just held our ground. And eventually, I think it was in 2010 or 11, when I was the chairman, for whatever reason, I think there might have been some external pressure. They agreed that ALPA could be the FOQA gatekeeper and that there would be protection. So that's an example of like, why do you have to be different? And so this limit, this 1,000 hour or 1,000 times that number, that's a limit. We've pointed out to them that would be a huge problem. Now, the last thing I want to say on retirement, I think it's the last thing. There's no telling. Um,
I might have a question, which
okay, sure. Um, is everybody needs to have their eyes wide open on this. If you go to a straight DC plan, and even to a lesser extent with that market plan, but if you go to straight to, that's all a function of work, and that would be a huge productivity enhancer for the company. And so I think you just need to be very aware of that. And I'm not saying that's a reason not to do either one of those. That's just a consequence of what would happen there. So anyhow, that was a really long answer to your retirement. The essentially what they brought this week on the straight DC is the same amount of money that was in the market plan, just reallocated. They did not propose a spill into market plan. They just proposed cash over the cap that would just come to you as income. So I hope that helped.
no, it does. And I know we were talking about beforehand. This is unscripted, but it's not unlawyered. And there's a reason
Oh
for
yeah,
that. Yeah, people have to go through, and obviously, we don't want to compromise or jeopardize your ability at the table. But I mean, yeah, I'm out here flying line. I have a lot of questions, and I'm not in the weeds, so I'm curious. And if you can't answer this, we can just skip to the next one. When we talk
right.
retirement, there are a lot of questions, but one in particular I've seen pop up amongst various peer groups is if we have a new plan that comes out, legacy plan is sunset, would there be a payout as you off-road into another one, or is that even discussed? Is that too far down the road? Can we get into that?
Okay, so if you're hearing this answer, that meant that survived the lawyers, right?
Right.
That this part did get cut. So no, we're not contemplating a payout. I don't. I have to really watch what I say here.
That's fine.
You certainly couldn't do a buyout and have it funded into a DC. Um, there's different types of terminations. They would probably, there's a lot of litigation concerns, and I believe that's probably the biggest one. And again, if we have 5,300 pilots, there's 5,300 different retirement stories, and I can guarantee you, because it's not the same as you just going out on the market and buying yourself an annuity. The number that you think that you would be getting for that is not as attractive as you would hope it would be. And we're not contemplating. I will tell you that the previous negotiating committee advanced that at one point, and it was categorically rejected by the company. I think the company might have even referenced it in their letter when they, in the response to Alpa's proffer of arbitration. I could be wrong about that. If I've misspoken, I apologize. But that that would be enormously expensive if that were to happen. That would just be a complete straight shutdown of a defined benefit plan.
I guess along those lines, again, I don't know if you can answer this or not, but
Right.
assume would a guy like me, would it freeze if I chose, hey, I want a bigger DC, but what I'm currently have, if I'm vested into this, I mean,
Yeah.
again, we might be getting too far into the weeds.
No. So when did you hire John?
19. So
So yeah,
I tripped across the line.
right. So and then it would take some time to transition, right? So let's just say it takes another year. So and what's contemplated in the company's proposal, that's like a soft freeze. And let's say now they're in their construct, people that migrate over to the new plan have a lesser FAE cap, like in the failed TA, instead of 330, everyone got 290. That's not
Okay.
what we proposed. We proposed everyone stays on the same cap. In fact, the higher the cap is, the higher the migration rates are predicted to be. But let's say so you have 6 years, and then and you have the opportunity to get 25 under your belt.
I
Is that
will.
right? Right.
Yeah.
So it would end up being essentially 12%, right, of the FAE. And we'll just make up a number. Well, we'll just stick with their number right now, so people won't think I'm indirectly hinting at different numbers. If they're 290, you would end up with 12%, and even though your accrual thing would stop whatever the transition at that point, 6 years, you'd have the rest of your career to go out and hit that 290 FAE cap. Now, we have pilots here and that don't have the 5 years of vesting. There are different ways to handle that. That's an issue that we've identified, and I've
Okay.
brought up to ALPA's national staff, and they've given us some answers on that. We're not. I don't want to cross that bridge yet because we don't know where that's going, but it is a concern. But that's how that would work with you. So in the end, you'd end up having whatever 12% of 290 is that would
Okay.
come in as an annuity.
Nope, that helps. Um, moving along, pay I think is another that's a long pole in the tent for this past week. Can we dive into pay a little bit and get your thoughts on that?
Yes, we sure can. In fact,
Good.
this is probably where we'll spend the rest of this conversation. Well,
I'll
not
get
all of it, not all of it, but so look, just as a recap, we were strongly urged by Alpa's staff of advising us and representation, hey, get everything on the table as soon as you can, and before the end of the year in 24. So we gave them our pay proposal. I believe it's October 24th. We're in Chicago, so it's been 7 months that we've been asking for that. And I've been talking about this even more recently. We've about run out of rope of, bargaining in the abstract, right? So, because if you're talking about an 18% cash over cap or a market-based thing or an FAE cap, 11%, 18% of what? The company has not wanted to provide that pay proposal. I'll speak to my own opinion here about that here in just a second, because they wanted they to be very forthright. They have not been happy with us. In fact, not at all, because they think we've completely built this huge Christmas tree of ornaments of ask here and ask that, and we're way above here and stuff, and we're being totally unreasonable. And so hold that thought about who's being unreasonable here in a minute. And but we've identified issues that have happened because our change in circumstances. We lost the postal contract. It's harder to get to work. So we need some kind of help in the deviation department and jump seating and things like that. We've had bases closed. We've had this transition of to belly freight in the white network. So we've had all these issues that popped up that weren't issues really during the TA ratification. So we had these other issues. And so like the work rules section, 412 and 25, and it's all related, get lumped in there, and including the duty rigs and trip rigs. And so one of the things when they said, oh, Alpa's asking for this, yeah, we proposed a change in the trip rig and we proposed changes in the duty rigs. And the reason we did that because we weren't sure where their pay rates were going to come in at. And look, we're trying to be extremely transparent. The industry, the three big ones, right? They all stepped together. We're currently almost 39% below that. The white, and I know I'm not discounting the narrow body, the 7.5 people, but for sake of conversation, I'm just speaking for top of scale wide body 15-year captain, although a lot of places have a 12-year scale. They're all at 465.13. They step another 4% on January 1st. So when we put this on the table a year ago, well, not a year ago, but last October, we put the Delta United American number plus $7. To us, that's not being unreasonable. That's right in the wheelhouse. And the other factor that's going on is the UPS and the IPA are bargaining right now, and UPS is our closest comparator. And they're not only our closest competitor, but if you look at us like at our contracts and everything, and the fact that they still have a legacy plan and they do the same job we do, they're our closest comparator. I mean, even, I was just got off the phone a second ago with Tom before I got on. Hawaiian, Hawaiian's rates are not too far apart from what the company has. Their cargo rate's a little bit lower, but you know what? Hawaiian flies their cargo stuff under FAR 117, completely different animal than us. And the way our schedules have been is like, man, maybe 117 is the way to go. We won't go down that road, but let me go for now. But because that's a whole nother unscripted. And but let's talk about their rate, right? So we have been complaining, or yeah, complaining is I whine some. Go, hey, we need to see their pay. because it's tied into everything. And we, even a couple of weeks ago, we had agreed in section 4 is where the rigs are. We said, okay, we're just not going to talk about the rigs anymore till we see what comes out with the pay. And then if the pay is not where it needs to be, then we're going to have to reintroduce the rigs. And so one of the things, when you're in mediation, the parties will make moves they won't otherwise normally make. I think had we not been in mediation this week, we would not have seen what happened, which was in the last hour. We were going to be done at 12 on Friday. Sometime after 11 o'clock Friday morning, we received the company's pay proposal. Now, what their proposal is, I believe it's 24%. It's a 5-year deal with 4 steps at the FedEx 3. They always offer a 3% escalator. That's just what they do. They redlined our long-range premium, our international override, and I'm sure there's something else that they redlined that is escaping me right now. But essentially, if I believe it right, I believe it's $416.09, right? I just looked at that, and we didn't take them to task at the table. We just thanked them for their proposal, and we left. And one of the things, and we go back, is this is what happens. I guess it's a little bit of inside baseball when you're at the table. And I don't know how many times we've heard this, but when they think we're asking for too much, when the company thinks we're asking for too much, we get the same soliloquy. They says, well, you're asking for the highest pay rates on earth, and you're asking for the best retirement plan on earth, and you're asking for all these work rules. And all they're doing when they're doing that, John, is they're reading it into the record for the mediator, right? Because the mediator's got to write a report. So, you know what? I guess we weren't aiming correctly on the on-earth thing. We're going to have to adjust our ask. We're going to try to be the highest rates in the galaxy. We're going to shoot for galactical. We'll just drop the on-earth thing, right? Because maybe we're going to need to based on what they offered. So this thing came across on Thursday, and it's like, what are we supposed to do with this? I mean, it hardly registers on the Richter scale in all our polling in terms of what would be a minimal acceptable number. And this is why the company didn't want to put this out. They knew that this was going to roil the crew force. And they go, oh, it's just a negotiation. Well, yeah, but not really. I mean, what are we supposed to do with this? Now, here's the other part that's very interesting. So we've negotiated work rules 4, 12, and 25. I think it's 8 times. It's been on each side of the each party's had it 4 different times. And the 41609 comes at the expense of eliminating block over 8, which is not just a 777 thing, right? MD-11 pilots can avail themselves of block over 8. Some 7.6 pilots can do that, depending on that. And then that's been in there since the 2006 contract. I was in the room when we negotiated that, and I'll get to that here in just a minute. And then block over 10, which has been there in our contract since the FPA days. Now, what does that mean to block over 10? Well, the way the block over 10 part works is if you're on a long 777 trip, like if you did Memphis to Dubai, and let's say it was a 14-hour leg or 14 and a half hours leg, those last 4.5 hours of that day, from 10 to 14 and a half, they're baked into that trip guarantee. That's part of the trip guarantee. What's not in there is the between 8 and 10 part. And then, after you fly your trip, they look at whether you've overflew or underflew, and that's how they determine how much block over 8 you received on that. So we knew that this was coming because there'd been rumors out there that this is what they were going to do, even though they've said previously in the response to the NMB at Alpes Proffer that they hadn't drawn a line in the sand about adding value to the contract. That's certainly what it looks like to us, because this is the proverbial rearrangement of the deck chairs. If you took out block over 8 and block over 10, well, the block over 10 stuff, not only that would that negatively affect the SAM, but I don't have the number right off the hand. it's a cut, right? And so, and I've got to say this, we wrote the update. One of our pilots emailed me about this, where it sounded like I was talking about that 41609 was a TA we agreed to, and it talking about the TA passes. I meant in a hypothetical standpoint, but you could have also maybe, I should have put if the TA had passed, we would be, if the TA 23 rates were in effect right now, what came across yesterday was $7 an hour more. But the thing that's not good about that is that it came at the expense of the removal of block over 8 or block over 10. Yeah, that is not a pathway to ratification. And I know, I've told pilots before, hey, don't be a one issue item voter. For us, there are certain things that they've got to pass our internal threshold. And what I mean, don't be a one issue voter is if we get everything to where we think it could be, and then could get it to the pilots to evaluate, look at the whole package. But things such as this, I mean, it is so inflammatory, what they've done here. And what's a little perplexing is going back to, so we've had multiple passes on 412 and 25. Well, block over 8 is in section 4, and it hasn't shown up yet in any of these passes, but it showed up in the compensation section now, which is in block over 3. We'll deal with it. But their proposal is so outlandishly low that I'm not sure how we're going to respond to it. When we'll be able to do that. There's a lot of other things that we're going to have to, engage on now, like on the rigs. And what's not crazy, but it's just, that's a direct assault on our rigs. They're wanting to. Here's what happened, and this is why we ended up with block over 8. In the FPA-TA contract, the company gave the choice. When I got hired here in 95, we were on a 7-hour day. That meant the trip rig was 1 to 3.43. This is a little history lesson that I'll try to keep short. And because we're on a 7-hour day, which is back from the Falcon days, you got 3.5 going out and 3.5 coming in. Our hourly rates were suppressed when you just looked at them compared to what was in the rest of the airline industry, because we're on a 7-hour day. And so the company said, hey, and the FPA asked for this, this is one of these things, be careful for what you ask for. Look, you can have either be on a 7-hour day of 1 to 3.43, or you can be on a trip rig of 1 to 4, and we'll correspondingly adjust the pay rates up 15.6%. And that's what's a wash. In fact, they called it cost neutral. And anybody from my vintage ever hears the term cost neutral, they get a little vomit in the back of their throat. Because here's what happened. In the international, like when I was negotiating with Bob Kameni, Bob was really senior. He flew Stansted in Paris. He lived in Memphis. That's what he did. So Stansted and back, 17.5-hour trip. But once you put the trip rig to 1 to 4, it was cheaper for them to keep the crew over in Stansted or Paris for another day, and it cost the same amount of money because you went from flying on the block to the trip rig. And so what do they have there? Now they've got a built-in the field reserve. Sound familiar, right? And so what happened was that our MD-11 pilots who were flying all the way around the world and doing hard stuff, and our DC-10 pilots flying throughout the night and shooting the VOR Alpha into Subic Bay in the Philippines and thunderstorms and stuff, were getting paid the same as the wide-body person flying to Ottawa or to Calgary. So we ran this whole campaign in 2004, the bargaining, our negotiating committee did in the contract comparisons about the definition of work and the value of work. So because what was happening is we were basically salaried pilots, and all that long block days were being washed out. And what we initially attempted to do for everybody was retain anything you worked over 8 hours in a day. And I was in the room at the very end, Bob and I and the two company officials, and they said, okay, block over 8, we get it. We don't want to put it into the trip guarantee because it would require us to hire more pilots, which it would. for reserve coverage and everything. We'd rather just pay it to you after you fly. Okay, a win's a win. We're going to take that. It recognizes the work performed, and it's become a staple. Our guarantees are low relative to the rest of the industry. This is the one thing that makes the 777, lower than, makes it more palatable when you look at what's going on in the rest of the industries. And so the same thing for an 11 pilot or a 7.6 if they do the block over 8. Now this funding of this pay rate comes at the extraction of that and block over 10. Well, that's highly problematic. Because I just stepped you through how we got there. It's been in our contract for 19 years, and block over 10 goes back over 26 years. And if that's not a definition of concession, I don't know what that is. And our pilots are in no mood to accept a concession, nor should they. So that's what makes this Section 3 so difficult. But now the rigs are in play, or could be in play, right? So we've got a lot of things that are going to require a lot of bargaining, with the rigs and everything else. And now that we have an idea of the total package, we still don't have scope worked out. And I know we hear this question a lot. I've already gotten several emails today. Hey, when can we be released? When are we at an impasse? Right? I might have just short circuited your next question. We're not there yet. We have to go through the wickets of the RLA. Like I just said, we haven't gotten their scope presentation. And at some point, I don't know who the new mediator is. We're going to try to have to negotiate, but if we can't, then that's what they call an impasse. And the RLA provides a way for that to get that. We understand how frustrating this is for everybody. It's a bad situation all the way around. Our BLGs are cut. I've got friends that are retiring, frequently, and this just is horrible. But we have got to be principled in what we do, otherwise they're going to walk all over us. And it's the same thing. We're principled about how we handled that dadgum, the ASAP and the FOQA, and we'll be principled about this. I was telling these guys a story, laugh about it. 20 something years ago, and our kids are young. We wanted to buy a trailer, an RV, and we went to the RV show. My wife found the one she wanted, had the right colors and everything, and there was a place here in Fort Worth that had it, and there was a dealership up in Oklahoma City that had the same thing, and they sell it to me for $500. I said that to the guy in Fort Worth, and he goes, "So you want to go up there and go get that?" Next day I was driving up to Oklahoma City with my dad to go get my trailer. Yeah. Am I principled? Yes, I am. And in things like this, we're going to be highly principled because we know the pilots are not going to stand for something that doesn't reflect their worth to the company and to the corporation. And that's what is so inflammatory about what happened yesterday. They knew this was going to happen. The company was loath to put out that pay rate. I don't know why they started that low. Other than maybe they want this process to keep going on or whatever, but it's out there. Everybody sees it, and everybody can see it for what it is. I hope that kind of helps you with pay.
No, it's pretty clear. And I think I heard you mention it before too. Is you had anticipation. You've done this before where the offer is going to come back and most likely it's going to be underwhelming. But it seems like this one in particular was definitely a little bit more so. It sent a pretty clear message, I think.
Oh, absolutely. From the highest pilots on Earth to the lowest paid cargo pilots on Earth, or something like that. Who
Yeah.
knows?
I would like to just touch on the mediator piece one more time and
Okay.
seal that deal. So obviously we don't know what's going to happen with that. That's a variable that I guess we'll just have to wait out and see. But there has not been any plan communicated yet of what a transition might look like. I harken back to early this year when we got a new mediator and then we had to do the brief and then the company had to do the brief and it just kind of got drug out. But we don't know what that's going to look like, correct?
We do not. I have no idea what's going on, and the way this is going is there needs to be progress still being shown by both sides, and And, I have no idea if they're going to determine if our next sessions, which are supposed to happen, June 23rd or 24th, whenever that is, if that's going to happen. I don't know that answer right now. I'll probably be informed of that next week. But John, as soon as we know, when it's communicated to us what the disposition of our case is and who's going to handle it going forward, we'll let everybody know. Like I said, we've always tried to be really transparent. Right now, our case is the third oldest case on the docket with the NMB. So we've been at it for a while, and we're just going to have to keep going at it. But I unfortunately have no information for you other than I know that the mediator's elected to retire, and he's not available in July. And I hope he has a great retirement. I've enjoyed working with him.
Well, I appreciate the update. Is there anything before we wrap up that we need to discuss or highlight? I know there is a picket coming up June 3rd. Go to the website and can RSVP to attend that. And it sounds like there's 2 additional pickets lined up potentially in San Francisco and Philadelphia. I guess don't quote me on that, but that's coming up potentially at the end of June as well, correct?
Right. I believe that's the 24th of June. I would, take a look on the website, and those are great ways to stay involved. We appreciate the pilot's support. We understand how difficult this is for you. We are trying our absolute best to represent you, not enter to a bad deal. And if we got to hang together, and we'll get through this. And I really appreciate you taking your time on a late night in Paris after flying all day. Thank you, John.
Yeah, John, I really appreciate it and look forward to catching up soon.
Okay, thanks, bud.
Thanks.